Hello, my friends, my brothers. We're going to continue reading Planting Churches That Reproduce by Joel Comiskey. Today, we are starting chapter 4 entitled, Do You Have What It Takes? I have my coffee here, my water. I'm ready to go. I hope you're ready to listen. Here we go. John Verrilman felt God calling him at the age of 19 to the pastorate. He volunteered for practically everything at his home church, New Life, in Puyallup, Washington. He also worked hard to earn a bachelor's degree in theology from Southwestern University. After graduation, John unsuccessfully tried to find a pastoral position near his home church. He was thankful for the opportunities to preach at New Life, but longed for something full-time. God blessed him with his FedEx day job to pay the bills and to support his wife Janet. Someday, he would also need to support a family, so working a marketplace job was important. John's frustration of not being in full-time ministry, however, increased daily. I really want to be a pastor, he confessed to Janet. I don't see myself working at FedEx much longer. Then it happened. John attended a church planting conference in Tacoma, Washington. He sensed a burden for those without Christ and realized how important it was to start new churches. Church planting would give him the perfect opportunity to spread his wings, and maybe even to start his own movement of churches. He didn't consider himself to be entrepreneurial, or even a strong people person. Yet, at the conference, he was challenged to believe that God could use anyone. Janet was willing but hesitant. She peppered John with practical questions, but John's vision and excitement stirred her to say yes. They were both ready to go for it. In the weeks and months following, John bought everything he could find about church planting, including books recommended at the conference. He was thrilled that Pastor Mark at New Life Church was willing to provide $200 per month for the first 2 years. Sorry that we're not able to give you any people at this time. You know our attendance has been way down this year. John knew southern Seattle, having lived there for nearly 5 years before moving to Puyallup. He figured it would be the perfect place to plant the church. He and Janet moved there in July and began making friends with their neighbors. 2 months later, they opened a Bible study in their home. 3 people showed up. After distributing flyers in the neighborhood, 2 more began attending. John's real focus, however, was the February launch date. Both he and Janet felt that Sunday services would give needed visibility to bring more visitors. They found a local community center to rent and spread the message about the first Sunday service. 55 people attended the first Sunday in February. John was thrilled. Although 20 were visiting from New Life, John was confident that all the dynamics were in place for continual church growth. John loved preaching. I found my calling in life, he told himself. In the next 4 months, attendance wavered between 25 and 35. Even though John spent hours posting flyers, sending out advertisements, and working the internet. John never considered himself a numbers person and vigorously opposed the church growth success syndrome. Yet, as the months wore on, he admitted feelings of failure. Where were all the people who committed themselves to show up each week? He grew to dislike Sunday morning services because he found himself consumed with those who weren't there. He felt as if he was pushing a heavy cart up a steep hill. The excitement from planting a church was gone. Now his focus was survival. He dreaded telling his friends and fellow pastors about what was happening at the church. He felt like a failure. 8 months after starting the church, a key family left to attend a nearby megachurch, reducing the attendance from 25 to 17. Then another family left. When 7 people showed up one Sunday, including Janet, he was beside himself. After enduring the same low attendance for several months and an increasingly negative attitude among members, John and Janet decided to close the church. Church members encouraged him to move on. He tried to put a good face on the decision by telling friends and family that it was the will of the Lord. Yet inwardly, he cried out to God and felt embarrassed. John and Janet's experience is quite common, and the pain is intense. Is there a way to know in advance who will successfully plant churches? The next question is there a specific church planting gift? If John Verrilman had demonstrated the gift of teaching, would more people have flocked to hear him? After all, Chuck Swindoll's church grew rapidly as droves of people came to hear Swindoll preach. I heard Chuck Swindoll preach once when he was pastoring in Fullerton, California, and went away amazed at his powerful teaching. He reeled off crystal clear, riveting illustrations that allowed me to peer through the windows of difficult biblical passages. No wonder people crammed in the church to hear him. But John Verrilman was no Chuck Swindoll. Well, what about the gift of apostleship? Most of us would agree that Paul the apostle was thoroughly gifted to plant churches. Many look at Paul as the greatest church planter of all time. The word apostle was used in ancient times to refer to an admiral over a fleet of ships, which under the orders from a ruler would start a colony. Apostles in that day had great authority to start colonies in foreign lands. In the New Testament, the apostolic gift applied to church planters like the Apostle Paul, who pioneered new territories for the gospel. Church planters would certainly benefit from having the gift of apostleship, and those who demonstrate this gift have an advantage when it comes to planting churches. The gift of evangelism would also be a great help. And what about the gift of leadership? Perhaps John Verrilman lacked the confidence of a leader that would have kept people coming back each week. It also seems that the gift of pastoring or teaching would energize a church planter to minister effectively to those in the congregation and attract more each Sunday. And who could argue that the gift of service or mercy wouldn't be beneficial? I don't believe that one particular gift determines whether a person is qualified to plant a church. All 21 gifts that Paul lists in the New Testament could benefit a church planter in some way. Those are found in 1 Corinthians 12 through 14, Ephesians 4, and Romans 12. In addition, God often blesses people with more than one gift. He also can sovereignly distribute a new gift to a person in time of need. Do you need a particular personality type? John Verrilman's personality was more timid than outgoing. People called him a good friend. He established long-term relationships, but he didn't excite a crowd when entering a room. Some people have pinpointed church planting effectiveness and personality types. Audrey Malfers, a church planting expert and author of Planting Growing Churches, believes that the leader of the church planting team needs either a high D driver or high inspiration personality type. Other team members could have a wide variety of styles, such as S for steady or C for conscientious. Malfers bases his conviction on various church planting studies, one of them being a study of the DISC personality test administered to a group of church planters. DISC is driver, inspiration, steady, and conscientious. In this particular study, the personality types of 66 church planters were correlated with the growth of their churches. Their survey revealed that the high D driver planters had an average attendance of 72 after the first year and 181 after 5.2 years. Those with a high I, or inspiration, had an average of 98 after the first year and an average of 174 after 3.6 years. The high S, or steady, had an average of 38 after the first year and 77 after 6.3 years, while the high C, conscientious, had an average of 39 after 1 year and 71 after 4.3 years. It does seem logical that an extrovert with more commanding personality would do better at attracting and sustaining a crowd. Yet my good friend David Jaramillo certainly doesn't have an inspiring driving personality, but he is smart and a steady administrator. He successfully discipled and raised up 50 small group leaders, and the church grew to 600 in attendance, as well as planting 4 churches. Then there's Mario Vega, senior pastor of the second largest church in the world. Mario is an introvert. I've spent a lot of time with Mario on many different occasions as we co-taught seminars. Mario rarely talks. Yet, under Mario's leadership, the Elim Church in San Salvador, El Salvador, has grown to approximately 11,000 home groups and 100,000 people attending these groups. And what about those planting house churches? People who effectively lead house churches don't need to attract large crowds. Jim Egley, a small group researcher, administered the DISC personality test among 200 small group leaders at Bethany World Prayer Center. After examining the research, he concluded, the initial research seems to show no strong correlation between DISC personality types and cell growth. 98% of Bethany's leaders had taken the DISC test and knew their primary and secondary traits what they were, but no particular type performed better. Egley found that both extroverted and introverted personality types were equally effective in growing and multiplying small groups. Granted, it's one thing to lead a small group. It's quite another to pull those groups together into a celebration service and sustain that growth. Jeanette Buller, an experienced church planter and coach, writes, starting something from scratch is a horse of a different color. Church planting involves making something happen that is not currently happen. It requires a certain creative energy that not everyone has. Effective church planters have an uncanny mix of personality, gifting, and natural talents that help the person persistently lead the church to fruitfulness. While finding the right person might be subjective, there are certain characteristics that church planters possess. Charles Ridley is one who has researched successful church planting more than anyone else. So what characteristics are important in church planters? Dr. Charles Ridley, a leading pioneer in church planting assessment, conducted a study of church planters in the United States and Canada to determine the characteristics of successful church planters. The one phrase that characterizes his research is, the best predictor of future behavior is past performance. From his research and field testing, he developed a list of 13 characteristics of effective church planters. 1. Visionizing capacity. Ability to project a future vision and bring the vision into reality. 2. Intrinsically motivated. Approaches ministry as a self-starter and works hard. 3. Creates ownership in ministry. Instills in the people a sense of personal responsibility for the growth and success of ministry. 4. Spousal cooperation. Effectively integrates ministry with family life. 5. Reaches the unchurched. Develops rapport with unchurched people and eventually connects them to church life. 6. Effectively builds relationships. Takes the initiative in getting to know people and deepening relationships. 7. Is committed to church growth. Values church growth as a method for building more and better disciples. Strives to achieve numerical growth within the context of spiritual and relational growth. 8. Responsive to the community. Adapts the ministry to the culture and needs of the local residents. 9. Utilizes the giftedness of others. Equips and releases people to do ministry according to their spiritual gifts. 10. Flexible and adaptable. Ability to adjust to change and ambiguity. 11. Builds cohesiveness in the church body. Enables the group to work toward a common goal and skillfully handles divisiveness and disunity. 12. Demonstrates resilience. Ability to sustain oneself emotionally and physically through setbacks, losses, disappointments, and failures. And 13. Exercises faith. Translates convictions into personal and ministry decisions. A behavioral assessment was developed to discover which church planters possess these characteristics in abundance. The assessment doesn't ask questions like, what do you think or believe? Rather, the questions are more like, tell me a time when you developed a relationship with an unsaved or unchurched person. Again, the premise is that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Anybody can say, oh yes, I believe the church should be reaching the unchurched. But if the person's past behavior doesn't match the theoretical statement, chances are the person won't behave differently in the future. Ridley's assessment is not a fill-in-the-blank type test. Success depends on the trained assessor's ability to recognize the church planting characteristics in the potential church planter. No assessment is foolproof. Some church planters have failed the Ridley assessment and have gone on to plant dynamic churches. Others scored very high and then failed. Those who assess others offer recommendations to the potential church planter. not scientific surety of their success or failure. As a safeguard, the assessment interview is often done with a team of 2 to 5 people so that it's not just one person's perception. The recommendation comes out of the group of discernment. No one will score perfect 10s in each category. There is no such thing as the perfect church planter. Ed Stetzer writes, most church planting leaders would acknowledge that a new church is more likely to fail when it is started by a planter who has not been assessed. All other factors being equal, an assessment assures the selection of better church planters with a higher likelihood of success. John Verrilman was not interviewed before planting the church, but looking back, he now realizes that such an assessment would have alerted him to certain danger signs. For example, John couldn't remember a time in his past when he initiated a gathering on his own. He was more of a follower than a leader, enjoying one-on-one relationships with people. Is it necessary to take a church planting assessment? I didn't always believe in church planting assessments. I even resisted them. They seemed mechanical and unnecessary. Then I planted the church in Moreno Valley. I knew from the beginning that my role was limited. I could only be the volunteer pastor because I was traveling 10 weeks out of the year and my primary calling had shifted. To compensate, we hired a full-time associate pastor who we hoped would become the lead pastor of Wellspring. This person felt called to join us, and everything seemed to fall into place. It soon became apparent, however, that he was not a gatherer. He was an excellent pastor and worship leader, but he didn't have the catalytic mix to gather people together. And that's what we needed in those initial stages of our church plant. At my prompting, he made more than 750 contacts in the community during the first several months, but was unable to draw them into the church. Even after noticing he wasn't the catalytic type, we decided to give him 2 more years to see if he could earn his salary from the fruit of his ministry. We took our cue from denominations that often give their church planters a 2-year salary and then expect the planter to live off the offerings of the church. At the end of the 2 years, he left Wellspring to find a role as a pastor of discipleship and worship, a role that fit his calling and gifting. As I look back, an assessment would have given me a better understanding of his gifts and abilities, and a realistic view of what I could expect from his ministry. We did learn important lessons during that time. Specifically, the type of person we needed at our church. God was good to help us find a catalytic gatherer in Eric Glover. I gladly turned the lead pastor role over to him while taking on the role of coach and church planting pastor. Bob Logan and Jeanette Buller have put together an excellent tape series and training manual called Cell Church Planter's Guide. Bob Logan, a church planting expert, points out that the lead pastor of a cell celebration church planting team should have catalytic leadership skills. Other members of the team might have a wide array of gifts and talents, but the lead pastor is different. According to Logan and Buller, some leaders are able to start 1 or 2 groups, but are not gifted at pastoring the growth of the church beyond those first groups. Many simple churches won't see the need for the same leadership characteristics that we at Wellspring were looking for. I talked to the leader of a house church planting movement who at one time offered the Ridley test but stopped doing so. He told me, "There are 2 reasons that we are not assessing our planters using this system. We are not paying them, and so there is less investment of money and less need for insurance that the planter will be successful in a self-sustained church in a given amount of time. And 2, most of our planters are homegrown, so we know them. They are already proven leaders. It is not always true that they are homegrown, and when they are not, there is still limited risk in beginning an organic church. As they begin 1 or more churches, time will tell if they are to become leaders of a movement." Tim Roundtree, co-founder of multiplyingchurches.org, administered Ridley's survey for many years, but discovered some problems. He observed that Ridley's analysis was not able to analyze church planters who might want to plant networks of simple churches. Roundtree developed an adapted analysis for church planters called the 360 assessment. This new assessment evaluates different levels of church planters, all the way from planting simple house churches to gathering a larger group of people together in a church plant. In chapters 7 through 10, I talk about different degrees of simplicity in church planting and how to begin well. John Verrilman launched his church before establishing a true core, and therefore was weighted down by Sunday gathering of people who didn't want to be there. I'll share in later chapters that there is another way to plant an effective church. Most would also agree that the call of God is more important than any type of assessment. The Apostle Paul never took Ripley's test, and ultimately the potential church planter needs to be honest with himself or herself. Malthus wisely counsels, "We are the ones, ultimately, who determine the accuracy of any assessment program. We can use such highly valid and sophisticated tools as the personality profile or the Myers-Briggs type indicator, but they only reflect the information that we supply. If that information is based on who we want to be or who someone else thinks we are and not on who we really are, then it tells us nothing." Another factor that affects the accuracy of assessment is ministry experience. The more ministry experience people have, the more accurate will be their assessment of themselves. We know our leadership abilities best when we take advantages of the opportunities to lead. All things considered, I do believe that assessing a church planter benefits the church and the church planter. Of the 13 Ridley characteristics, perhaps the most critical to church planting effectiveness is the relationship between church planter and his spouse or family. The husband and wife team. John and Janet Verrilman had a great marriage. They took regular date nights and committed themselves to prioritize marriage over ministry. Many don't. I think of one planter who sent out the following emails as he was preparing to launch a church in Nevada. The flow of emails within a 2-month time period went like this. "We have been putting out door hangers in nearby neighborhoods and have sent out a 50,000-piece mail out to let folks know about services. Pray that these invitations would get into the right hands and would draw in a mighty harvest." Next email. "All systems in place. Please pray for the installation of the sound and lighting systems of the church. There is also a team building the stage for the auditorium that we will use. Pray that they will get this completed in time." Next email. "Praise God. We had 12 families visit from the mail out and door hangers we sent out." Next email. "Pray for clarity on how to get the word out in the area about the church." And then I received the following email. "I heard God saying that the church was not viable and that he had somewhere else for me to serve. Obviously, this was shocking and difficult to hear, but I felt I should evaluate this with the organization that has primarily been funding this new work." When I inquired why he quit so early in the process, he told me that his spouse was not in agreement. When the pressure mounted because of all the required work, this particular church planter found his marriage faltering. It was either the church plant or his wife. He chose correctly and decided to save his marriage. Church planting will involve everyone in the family. Both the husband and the wife must be called. Jesus told us to count the cost before making a decision to follow him. Counting the church planting cost means that both husband and wife are in 100% agreement before starting the church. Church planting probably will be more demanding and rigorous than ever imagined, so be prepared. John Verrilman now looks back at his church planting experience with amusement and even joy. The trials and struggles he experienced have prepared him for his current marketplace ministry. He's self-employed, leads a home group, and plays a key role in a growing church in Seattle that has now planted 3 daughter churches. John teaches one of the sessions for future church planters and often mentions his own failures. He knows from experience the dangers of Lone Ranger church planting and is quick to promote team ministry. He also believes strongly in gathering a larger, stronger core in home groups before beginning a weekly celebration. What he and Janet learned through the hard knocks of experience, they freely pass on to others. And that is chapter 4. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time with chapter 5. God bless you.